Book 2, The Individual, the State, and Education. It's like 34 pages. This is going to take a minute. Again, I don't know if I can really stress this enough. How much I hate reading this. This sucks. Alright. Book 2, The Individual, the State, and Education. With these words I was thinking that I had made an end of discussion, but the end in truth proved to be only a beginning. For Glaucon, who is always the most pugnacious of men, was dissatisfied at Thrasymachus' retirement. He wanted to have the battle out, so he said to me, Socrates, do you wish really to persuade us, or only to seem to have persuaded us that to be just is always better than to be unjust? I should wish really to persuade you, I replied, if I could. Then you certainly have not succeeded. Let me ask you now, how would you arrange goods? Are there not some which we welcome for their own sakes and independently of their consequences, as for example harmless pleasures and enjoyments which delight us at the time, although nothing follows from them? I agree in thinking that there is such a class, I replied. Is there not also a second class of goods, such we acknowledge sight, health, which are desirable, not only in themselves, but also for their result? Certainly, I said. And would you not recognize a third class, which such as gymnastics and care of the sick and the physician's art, also the various ways of money-making? These do us good, but we regard them as disagreeable, and no one would choose them for their own sake, but only for the sake of some reward or result which flows from them. I really like this, the altruistic ideology that somebody could potentially be doing something with no self-interest at all. The concept, you'd have to argue to the level that there's no good or gain that you're ever gonna get. There's no point ever that you were happy or gained pleasure from it, and that you always did it just for the sake of duty and honor and for the sake of compassion for other, is not a human capability. Because I want to know in which of the three classes you would place justice. In the highest class, I replied, among those goods which he would be happy desires both for their own sake and for the sake of their results. Then the many for another mind, they think that justice is to be reckoned in the troublesome class, among goods which are to be pursued for the sake of rewards and reputation, but in themselves are disagreeable and rather to be avoided. I know I said that this is their manner of thinking and that this was the thesis which Thrasymachus was maintaining just now when he censored justice and praised injustice, but I am too stupid to be convinced by him. I wish he said that you would hear me as well as him, and then I shall see whether you and I agree. First, Thrasymachus seemed to me like a snake, to have been charmed by your voice sooner than he ought to have been, but to my mind the nature of justice and injustice has not yet been made clear. Setting aside the rewards and results, I want to know what they are in themselves and how they inwardly work in the soul. If you please, then I will receive the argument of Thrasymachus, and first I'll speak of the nature and origin of justice according to the common view of them. Secondly, I'll show that all men who practice justice do so against their will, of necessity, but not as good. And third, I'll argue that there is reason in this view, for the life of the unjust is after all better far than the life of the unjust. After everything said and done, the injustice will have to face the injustice they did at some point. There will be a reckoning. If what they say is true, Socrates, since I myself am not of their opinion, but still I acknowledge that I am perplexed when I hear the voices of Thrasymachus and myriads of other dining in my ear. And on the other hand, I've never yet heard the superiority of justice to injustice maintained by anyone in a satisfactory way. I want to hear justice praised in respect of itself, then I shall be satisfied. And you are the person from whom I think that I'm most likely to hear this. And therefore I will praise the unjust life to the utmost of my power, and my manner of speaking will indicate that the manner in which I desire to hear you to praising justice and censuring injustice. Will you say whether you approve of my proposal? Dude says, indeed I do, nor can I imagine any theme about which a man of sense would often wish to converse. I don't necessarily want to sit down and have this conversation. It's essential to go through, but this guy obviously cherishes it and craves it and gets off on it, so justice is a core element of existing. I'm delighted, he replied, to hear you say so, and shall begin by speaking as I proposed of the nature of the origin of justice. They say that to do injustice is by nature good, to suffer injustice evil, but the evil is greater than the good. And so when men have done and suffered injustice and had experience of both, not being able to avoid the one and obtain the other, they think that they had better agree among themselves to have neither. Hence there arise laws and mutual covenants, and that which is ordained by law is termed by them lawful and just. This they affirm to be the origin and nature of justice. It is a mean or compromise between the best of all, which is to do injustice and not be punished, and the worst of all, which is to suffer injustice without the power of retaliation and justice. Being at the middle point between the two is tolerated not as good, but as the lesser evil, and honored by reason of the inability of men to do injustice. For no man who is worthy to be called a man would ever submit to such an agreement if he were able to resist. He would be mad if he did. Such is the received account, Socrates, of the nature and the origin of justice. Now that those who practice justice do so involuntarily, and because they have not the power to be unjust, will best appear if we imagine something of this kind. Having given both to the just and the unjust power to do what they will, let us watch and see whither desire will lead them, and we shall discover in the very act the just and unjust man to be proceeding along the same road, following their interests, which all natures deem to be their good, and are only diverted into the path of justice by the force of the law. The liberty which we are supposing may be most completely given to them in form of such power as is said to have been possessed by Gygas, the ancestor of Croesus the Lydian. According to the tradition, Gygas was a shepherd in the service of the king of Lydia. There was a great storm, and an earthquake made an opening in the earth at the place where he was feeding the flock. Amazed at the sight, he descended into the opening, where among other marvels he beheld a hollow brazen horse having doors, at which he, stooping and looking in, saw a dead body of stature as appeared to him more than human, and having nothing but gold ring. This he took from the finger of the dead and rescinded. Now the shepherd met together according to the custom that they might send their monthly report about the flock to the king. Into their assembly came heaving the ring on his finger, and as he was sitting among them, he chanced to turn to collect of the ring inside his hand, when instantly he became invisible to the rest of the company, and they began to speak of him as if he were no longer present. He was astonished at this, and again touching the ring, he turned the collet outward and reappeared. He made several trials of the ring, and always with the same result, whereupon he contrived to be chosen one of the messengers who were sent to the court, where as soon as he arrived, he seduced the queen, and with her help considered against the king, and slew him, and took the kingdom. Suppose now that there were two such magic rings, and the just put one on them, and the unjust the other. No man can be imagined to do of such an iron nature that he would stand fast in justice. No man would keep his hands off what was not his own when he could safely take what he liked out of the market, or go into houses and lie with anyone at his pleasure, or kill or release from prison whom he would, and in all respects be like a god among men. Then the actions of the just would be as the actions of the unjust. They would both come at last to the same point, and this may truly affirm to be great proof that a man is just, not willingly or because he thinks that justice is any good to him individually, but of necessity. For wherever anyone thinks that he can safely be unjust, there he is unjust. For all men believe in their hearts that injustice is far more profitable to the individual than justice, and he who argues, as I have been supposing, will say that they are right. If you could imagine anyone obtaining this power of becoming invisible, and never doing any wrong or touching what was in others, he would be thought by the lookers on to be most wretched idiot, although they would praise him to one another's face and keep in appearances the one another from a fear that they too might suffer injustice. And I want to dive back to another point that was talked about. All natures deemed to be their good, then we shall discover the very act of the just and unjust man to be proceeding along the same road, following their interest, which all natures deem to be their good, and are only diverted into the path of justice by force of law. There's 2 points I wanted to break that down. People think that what you do something, and then you justify it by whatever you've decided that you're a good person for doing whatever you did. It's like, I use Mackenzie Engelhart because she's the easiest fucking one to just keep leaning on. She thinks was the hero and the protector for gossiping and slandering my name and doing all the just shitty things cunts do in secret behind your fucking back to destroy your happiness because they get off on it. They enjoy it. Gives her pleasure. And so it's all natures are kind of like that instinctually. To know that it's an instinct to think and feel that way and to be able to challenge your ideas. Now that's not natural. It's something that you have to work at and challenge yourself. And most people don't want to do that. They don't want to dive into their brain. They don't want to think about anything. They just want to do something. And if it was wrong, they just want to not be guilty, not feel any emotion that they don't like and pretend it never happened and move on trying to feel the good vibe and blah, blah, blah. And then the point of they're only diverted to the path of justice by force of law. That, I don't know. I think there's more ways. I mean, there's natural laws that motivate people to do the right thing, but those don't tend to work on people that are steadfast in their psychopath nature, their love for their fucking chaotic world that they create for themselves and everyone that they pretend to care about. There's a word liberty that I want to break down real quick too. Liberty being freedom to exist as you want to exist in this world. And we tend to be tied to not have full liberties because there's these rules and boundaries that we respect as humans. That becomes justice to follow those rules and let everybody exist the way they want so that everyone can have liberty. Anyway, it's tricky, just a little tricky, but they go beyond with this, saying that if someone had total liberties and was invisible, claiming that everybody would succumb to doing horrific things. Just had never given thought of whether I would change my normal mode of behavior just because no one could see me and then cross those borders that are written and unwritten. Maybe some of them, like fucking, if I wanted to go to Mexico or something, like I wouldn't bother fucking dealing with some person that wants to track my comings and goings for whatever reason they got, but... Anyway, going back to this thing, I'm gonna get this thing done. Now, if we are to form a real judgment of life of the just and unjust, we must isolate them. There is no other way. And how is the isolation to be effected? I answer, let the unjust man be entirely unjust, and the just man entirely just. Nothing is to be taken away from either of them, and both are to be perfectly furnished for the work of their respective lives. First, let the unjust be like other distinguished masters of craft, like the skillful pilot or physician, who knows intuitively his own powers and keeps within their limits, and who, if he fails at any point, is able to recover himself. So let the unjust make this unjust attempt in the right way, and lie hidden if he means to be great in his injustice. He who is once found out, is nobody. For the highest reach of injustice is to be deemed just when you are not. Therefore I say that in the perfectly unjust man we must assume the most perfect injustice. There is to be no deduction, but we must allow him, while doing the most unjust acts, to have acquired the greatest reputation for justice. If he have taken a false step, we must be able to recover himself. He must be one who can speak with effect. If any of his deeds comes to light, and who can force his way there by force, is required by his courage and strength and commanded of money and friends. And at his side let us place the just man in his nobleness and simplicity, wishing, as Aeschylus says, to be and not to seem good. There must be no seeming, for if he seems to be just, he will be honored and rewarded. And then we shall not know whether he is just for the sake of justice or for the sake of honor and reward. Therefore let him be clothed in justice only, and have no other covering, and he must be imagined in the state of life opposite of the former. Let him be the best of men, and let him be thought the worst. Then he will have been put to the proof, and we shall see whether he will be affected by the fear of infamy and its consequences. And let him continue lust to the hour of death, being just and seeming to be unjust. When both have reached the uttermost extreme, the one of justice and the other of injustice, the judgment be given which of them is the happier of the two. That's just fucking... I love this. I love where this one's going. This is gonna be fucking great. I hope. They've been fucking letting me down a little bit lately. Heavens, my dear Glock, and I said, how energetically you polish them up for the decision, one and then the other, as if they were two statuses. I do my best, he said, and now that we know what they are like, there is no difficulty in tracing out the sort of life which awaits either of them. This I will proceed to describe, but as you may think the description of little too coarse, I ask you to suppose, Socrates, that the words which follow are not mine. Let me put them into the mouths of the eulogist of injustice. They will tell you that the just man who is thought unjust will be scourged, raked, bound, will have his eyes burnt out, and at last, after suffering every kind of evil, he will be impaled. Then he will understand that he ought to seem only and not be just. The words of whoever may be more truly spoken of the unjust than of the just, for the unjust is pursuing a reality. He does not live with a view to appearances. He wants to be really unjust and not seem only. And then the quote goes, his mind has a soil deep and fertile, out of which spring has prudent counsels. So that's what he wants to pretend to be like. Someone's got strong roots, sturdy, nice and fertile and healthy, where everything they say and do comes out as their greatness, their wisdom, blah, blah, blah. In the first place, he is thought just and therefore bears rule in the city. He can marry whom he will and give in marriages to whom he will. Also, he can trade and deal where he likes, and always to his own advantage, because he has no misgivings about injustice. And in every contest, whether in public or private, he gets the better of his antagonist and gains at their expense, and is rich, and out of his gains he can benefit his friends and harm his enemies. Moreover, he can offer sacrifices and dedicate gifts to the gods abundantly and magnificently, and can honor the gods or any man whom he wants to honor in far better style than the just, and therefore he is likely to be the dearer than they are to the gods, unless Socrates, gods and men are said to unite in making the life of the unjust better than the life of the just. He was going to say something in answer to Glaucon when Adeimantus' brother interposed. Socrates, he said, you do not suppose there is nothing more to be urged. Why, what else is there? I answered. The strongest point of all has not been even mentioned, he replied. If he fails in any part, do you assist him, although I must confess that Glaucon had already said quite enough to lay me in the dust and take from me the power of helping justice. Nonsense, he replied, but let me add something more. There is another side to Glaucon's argument about the praise and censure of justice and injustice, which is equally required in order to bring out what I believe to be his meaning. Parents and tutors are always telling their sons and their wards that they are to be just, but why? Not for the sake of justice, but the sake of character and reputation, in hope of obtaining for him who is reputed just some of those offices, marriages, and like which Glaucon he enumerated among the advantages occurring to the unjust from the reputation of justice. More, however, is made of appearances by this class of persons than by the others, for they throw in the good opinions of the gods, and will tell you of a shower of benefits of which heavens, as they say, rain upon the pious. And this accords with the testimony of the noble Hesiod in Homer, the first of whom says that gods make the oaks of the just to bear acorns at their summits and bees in the middle, and sheep are borrowed down from the weight of their fleeces. Many other blessings of a like kind are provided for them, and Homer is very similarly strained, for he speaks of one as the fame of some blameless king who, like a god, maintains justice, to whom the black earth brings forth wheat and barley, those trees are bowed with fruit, and his sheep never fail to bear, and the sea gives him fish. Still grander are the gifts of heaven, which has just back into a point where they talk about the fake. I'll be fake as fuck and just play pretend. That's the game. That's how you get what you want in this world. Play fucking pretend, fake it till you fucking make it, lie, cheat, steal, stab people in the back, and pretend you're good, and if you ever get caught, pretend you never did it, deny, lie, fucking do whatever you can to focus on your victim as if you're a victim and they're after you and you didn't do nothing wrong, and just be perfect in fucking being fake and lying and conning and being a fucking cunt. And then you can get people thrown in jail, and you can send people to go attack your victim, and you can destroy relationships that have been... Anyway. Still grander are the gifts of heaven, which Macias and his son vouchsafe to the just. They take them down into the world below, where they have the saints lying on couches at a feast, everlasting drunk, crowned with garlands. Their ideas seem to be that an immortality of drunkenness is the highest meed of virtue. Some extend their rewards yet further. The posterity, as they say, of the faithful and just shall survive to the third and fourth generation. This is the style in which they praise justice. But about the wicked there is another strain. They bury them in sloth and hate, and make them carry water, and also while while they are yet living they bring them to infamy, and inflict upon them punishments which Glaucon described as the portions of the just who are reputed to be unjust. Nothing else does their invention supply. Such is their manner of praising the one and censuring the other. Once more, Socrates, I'll ask you to consider another way of speaking about justice and injustice, which is not confined to the poets, but is found in prose writing. The universal voice of mankind has always declared that justice and virtue are honorable, and grievous, and toilsome, and that the pleasures of vice and injustice are easy of attainment, and are only censored by law and opinion. They say also that honesty is for most part less profitable than dishonesty, and they are quite ready to call wicked men happy, and to honor them both in public and private, when they are rich, or in any other way influential, while they despise and overlook those who may be weak and poor, even though acknowledging them to be better than the other. I like this one. It's like, it's all over politics. It's all inbred from top to the bottom. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the point that they make kind of at the end there is not the best getting and giving the best so that we can have the best collectively. It's just someone says, I know my buddy does this and he can get it done, and we can funnel money to him, and then his family will do well and their business will do well, and they'll pay people money, so it will trickle down in the economy and it will look good to everybody. So who cares if it's not the greatest and the best thing, and we didn't let everybody get involved and find out what we could have done to make it even better. I'm just rambling on now. Oh, the sun feels good. It was getting cold. Alright, we are back to it over here. But most extraordinary of all is their mode of speaking about virtue and the gods. They say that the gods apportion calamity and misery to many good men, and good and happiness to the wicked, and mendicant prophets go to rich men's door and persuade them that they have a power committed to them by the gods of making an atonement for man's own or his ancestral sins by sacrificing his charms, with rejoicing and feasts. They promise to harm an enemy, whether just or unjust, at a small cost, with magic arts and incantations binding heaven, as they say, to execute their will, and the poets are the authorities to whom they appeal, now smoothing the path of vice with the words of Hesiod. Vice may be had in abundance without trouble. The way is smooth and her dwelling place is near, but before virtue the gods have set toil. It seems like it's a way of challenging your spirit in a tedious and uphill road, then citing Homer as a witness that the gods may be influenced by men, for he also says, the gods too may be turned from their purpose, and men pray to them and avert their wrath by sacrifices, and smoothing entreaties, and by libations, and the odor of fat when they have sinned and transgressed. And they produce a host of books written by a couple people who are children of the moon and the muses. That is what they say, according to which they perform their rituals and persuade not only individuals but whole cities, that expiations and atonements for sins may be made by sacrifices and amusements for which fill a vacant hour, and are equally at the service of the living and the dead. The latter sort they call mysteries, and they redeem us from the pains of hell. But if we neglect them, no one knows what awaits us. He proceeded, and now when the young men hear all this said about virtue and vice, and the way in which gods and men regard them, how are their minds likely to be affected? And my dear Socrates, those of them, I mean, who are quick-witted and like bees on the wings, light on every flower, and from all that they hear are prone to draw conclusions as to what manner of persons they should be and in what way they should walk, if they would make the best of life. Probably the youth will say to himself in the words of Pindar, can I by justice or by crooked ways of deceit ascend a loftier tower, which may be a fortress to me all my days? I like that. That's how people think. It's like, how can I get there quicker? And if the risk isn't there, then they're definitely gonna cheat, lie, steal if they can get away with it. And what's the fastest way they can build their little castle and pretend to be kings and queens at the expense of all the little peasants around them that they pretend and pretend and pretend. For what men say is that if I am really just and am not also thought just, profit there is none, but the pain and loss on the other hand are unmistakable. But if though unjust I acquire the reputation of justice, a heavenly life is promised to me. Since then as a philosopher prove appearance tyrannize over truth, and is lord of happiness to appearance, I must devote myself. I will describe around me a picture, and shadow virtue to be the vestibule and exterior of my house. Behind I will trail the subtle and crafty fox, as Archilochus, greatest of sages, recommends. But I hear someone exclaiming that the concealment of wickedness is often difficult, to which I answer, nothing great is easy. Nevertheless the argument indicates this. If we would be happy to be the path along which we should proceed, with a view to concealment we will establish secret brotherhoods and political clubs. And there are professors of rhetoric who teach the arts of persuading courts and assemblies, and so partly by persuasion and partly by force I shall make unlawful gains and not be punished. Still I hear a voice saying that gods cannot be deceived, neither can they be compelled. But what if there are no gods? Or suppose them to have no care of human things? Why in either case should we mind about concealment? And even if there are gods, and they do care about us, yet we know of them only from tradition and genealogies of the poets. And these are the very persons who say that they may be influenced and turned by sacrifices, and soothing entreaties, and by offerings. Let us be consistent then, and believe both or neither. If the poets speak truly, why then we had better be unjust, and offer the fruits of injustice. For if we are just, although we may escape the vengeance of heaven, we shall lose the gains of injustice. But if we are unjust, we shall keep the gains, and by our sinning and praying and sinning, the gods will be propitiated, and we shall not be punished. But there is a world below in which either we or our posterity will suffer for our unjust deeds. Yes, my friend, will be the reflection, but there are mysteries and atoning deities, and these have great power. That is what mighty cities declare, and children of the gods, who were their poets and prophets, bear a like testimony. On that principle, then, shall we any longer choose justice rather than the worst injustice? When if we only unite... So when they're talking about justice versus injustice, they're still talking about somebody that's doing their interests and manipulating everybody to think they're doing it for everybody else and because they're a good person. But the reality is they're just terrible, selfish, narcissistic pieces of shit doing whatever they fucking feel like, because no human being is gonna know. So if no human being can find out about all their lies and their deceit, then who gives a fuck? And if the gods exist and can strike them down, then fucking do it, because they don't give a flying fuck about anyone or anything but them fucking selves. When, if we only unite the latter with a deceitful regard to appearance, we shall fare to our mind both with gods and men, in life and after death, as the most numerous and highest authorities tell us. Knowing all this, Socrates, how can a man who has any superiority of mind or person or rank or wealth be willing to honor justice, or indeed to refrain from laughing when he hears justice praised? And even if there should be someone who is able to disprove the truth of my words, and who is satisfied with that justice is best, still he is not angry with the unjust, but is very ready to forgive them, because he also knows that men are not just of their own free will, unless peradventure there be someone who the divinity within him may have inspired with the hatred of injustice, or who has attained knowledge of the truth but with no other man. He only blames injustice who, owing to cowardice or age or some weakness, has not the power of being unjust, and this is proved by the fact that he obtains the power, he immediately becomes unjust as far as he can be. And that's a little bullshit, because someone that has gone through justice is gonna forgive people. Jesus would do it, that kind of thing, but they still wouldn't do it without a repenting and an atonement. It's not like a soft-ass little pussy that says, oh, I forgive you, thanks, come on back, without any sort of, I think they say it in this book somewhere, it was in this book, no, that's The Art of War. Want to be just and live in a just world where the deceitful pieces of fucking scum are exposed, their behaviors, who they are as people, and then a world where people aren't just playing pretend so they can fit in and would stand on business so everyone can live in a happy world. Not just the evil pieces of shit like Kenzie who do whatever the fuck they want, not give a fuck about anyone or anything, but being happy every fucking second of every waking hour of every fucking moment of their fucking life. And if destroying other human beings makes them happy, though, and guess what? They're gonna go do that too. Right, Kenzie? The cause of all this, Socrates, was indicated by us at the beginning of the argument when my brother and I told you how astonished we were to find that of all the professing of justice, beginning with the ancient heroes of whom any memorial has been preserved to us, and ending with men of our own time, no one has ever blamed injustice or praised justice except with a view to the glories, honors, and benefits which flow from them. No one has ever adequately described either in verse or prose the true essential nature of either of them abiding in the soul and invisible to any human or divine eye, or shown that of all the things of a man's soul, which he has within him, justice is the greatest good, and injustice the greatest evil. Had this been the universal strain, had you sought to persuade us of this from our youth upward, we should not have been on the watch to keep one another from doing wrong, but everyone would have been his own watchman, because afraid, if he did wrong, of harboring in himself the greatest of evils. I dare say that Thrasymachus and others would seriously hold the language which I have been merely repeating, the words even stronger than these about justice and injustice, grossly I conceive perverting their true nature. But I speak of the vehement manner, as I must frankly confess to you, because I want to hear from you the opposite side, and I would ask you to show not only the superiority which justice has over injustice, but what effect they have on the possessor of them, which makes the one to be good and the other an evil to him. And please, as Glaucon requested of you, to exclude reputations, for unless you take away from each of them this true reputation, and add on the false, we shall say that you did not praise justice, but the appearance of it. We shall think that you are only exhorting us to keep injustice dark, and that you are really agreeing with Thermascus in thinking that justice is another good, and the interest of the stronger, and that injustice is a man's own profit and interest, which through injuries to the weaker. Now, as you have admitted that justice is one of the highest class of goods, which are desired indeed for their results, but in a far greater degree for their own sake, like sight or hearing or knowledge or health, or other real and natural, not merely conventional good, I would ask you in praise of justice to regard one point only, I mean the essential good and evil which justice and injustice work in the possessor of them. Let other praises justice and censure injustice, magnifying the reward and honors of the one and abusing the other. That is a manner of arguing which, coming from them, I am ready to tolerate, but from you who have spent your whole life in the consideration of this quest, unless I hear the contrary from your own lips, I expect something better. And therefore I say, not only prove to us that justice is better than injustice, but show that they either of them do to the possessor of them, which makes the one to be good and the other an evil, whether seen or unseen by gods and men. And it seems to be kind of talking about karma in this point, where if you do good, does nature balance itself out and provide good back to you? Or do you just have to suffer that the evil, unjust fucking scum of this earth are just going to keep getting off on it, keep getting high on the destruction and chaos because they love living in the negative vibration of destruction and chaos and lust and not giving a fuck about anyone or anything because it makes them happy to be fucking evil, to be pieces of backstabbing scum, lying to themselves and everyone around them every fucking moment of every waking hour of every fucking day, it seems, for these people. I'd always admired the genius of Glaucon and Admantus, but on hearing these words I was quite delighted and said, sons of an illustrious father that has not a bad beginning of the Elegiac verses with the admirer of Glaucon, made in honor of you after you had distinguished yourselves at the battle of Megara. Sons of Ariston, he sang, divine offspring of an illustrious hero. The epithet is very appropriate, for there is something truly divine in being able to argue as you have done for the superiority of injustice, and remaining unconvinced by your own argument. And I do believe that you are not convinced. This I infer from your general character, for I had judged only from the speech I should have mistrusted you. But now the greater my confidence in you, the greater is my difficulty in knowing what to say, for I am in a strait between two. On one hand, I feel that I am unequal to the task, and my inability is brought home to me by the fact that you were not satisfied with the answer which I made with Damascus, proving, as I thought, the superiority which justice has over injustice. Yet I cannot refuse to help while breath and speech remain to me. I am afraid that there would be an impiety in being present when justice is evil spoken of and not lifting up a hand in her defense, and therefore I had best give such help as I can. This book is so long. It's so long. 300 more pages to go. Glock and the rest entreated me by all means not to let the question drop, but to proceed in the investigation. They wanted to arrive at the truth, first, and by the nature of justice and injustice, and secondly about their relative advantages. I told them that what I really thought, that the inquiry would be a serious nature, and would inquire very good eyes. Seeing men, I said that we are no great wits. I think we had better adopt a method which I may illustrate thus. Suppose that a short-sighted person had been asked by someone to read small letters from a distance, and it occurred to someone else that they might be found in another place, which the letters were larger. If they were the same, and he could read the larger letters first, and then proceed to the lesser, this would have been thought a rare piece of good fortune. Very true, said Adeimantus. But how does the illustration apply to our inquiry? I will tell you, I replied. Justice, which is the subject of our inquiry, is, as you know, sometimes spoken of as the virtue of an individual, and sometimes as the virtue of the state. True, he replied. And is not a state larger than an individual? It is. Then, in the larger, the quantity of justice is likely to be larger, and the more easily discernible. I propose, therefore, that we inquire that the nature of justice and injustice, first as they appear in the state, and secondly, in the individual, proceeding from the greater to the lesser, and comparing them. That, he said, is an excellent proposal. And if we imagine the state in process of creation, we shall see the justice and injustice of the state in process of creation also. I dare say, when the state is completed, there may be a hope that the object of our search will be more easily discovered. But ought we to attempt to construct one? I said, for to do so, as I am inclined to think, will be a very serious task. Reflect, therefore. I've reflected, said Adeimantus, and am anxious that you should proceed. A state, I said, arises as I conceive out of the needs of mankind. No one is self-sufficing, but all of us have many wants. Can any other origin of a state be imagined? There can be no other. And as we have many wants, and many persons are needed to supply them, one takes a helper for one purpose and another for another, and when these partners and helpers are gathered together in one habitation, the body of inhabitants is termed a state. True, he said, and they exchange with one another, and one gives and another receives under the idea that the exchange will be for their good. Then I said, let us begin and create an idea, a state, and yet the true creator is necessity, who is the mother of our inventions. Of course, he replied, now the first and greatest of necessities is food, which is condition of life and existing. The second is dwelling, and the third clothing, and the like. And now let us see how our city will be able to supply this great demand. We may suppose that one man is a husbandman, another a builder, someone else a weaver. Shall we add to them a shoemaker, or perhaps some other purveyor to their bodily wants? Quite right. The barest notion of a state must include 4 or 5 of men. Clearly. And how will they proceed? Will each bring the result of his labors to a common stock? The individual husbandman, for example, producing for 4, and laboring 4 times as long and as much as he need in the provision of food, with which he supplies others as well as himself? Or will he have nothing to do with others and not be at the trouble of producing for them, but provide for himself alone, a fourth of the food in a fourth of the time, and in the remaining 3/4 of the time be employed in making a house or a coat or a pair of shoes, having no partnership with others, but supplying himself all his own wants? Adeimantus thought that he should aim at producing food only and not at producing everything. Probably, I replied, that would be a better way. When I hear you say this, I am myself reminded that we are not all alike. There are diversities of natures among us which are adapted to different occupations. Very true. And I will have to work better done when a workman has many occupations or when he has only one. When he only has one. Furthermore, there can be no doubt that a work is spoiled when not done at the right time. No doubt. For business is not disposed to wait until the doer of the business is at its leisure, but the doer must follow up what he is doing and make the businessman business his first object. And if so, he must infer that all things are produced more plentifully and easily and better quality when one man does one thing which is natural to him and does it at the right time and leaves other things. Undoubtedly, then more than 4 citizens will be required for the husbandman will not make his own plow or mattock or other implements of agriculture if they are to be good for anything. Neither will the builder make his tools, and he too needs many, and in the manner the weaver and shoemaker. True, then carpenters and smiths and many other artisans will be sharers in our little state, which is already beginning to grow. Yet even if we add netherds, shepherds, and other herdsmen in order for that our husbandsmen may have oxen to plow with, and builders as the may have drought cattle, and carriers and weavers fleeces and hides, still our state will not be very large. That is true, yet neither will it be very small, a state which contains all these. Then again, there's the situation of the city. To find a place where nothing need be imported is well nigh impossible. Then there must be another class of citizens who will bring the required supplies from another city. There must. But if a trader goes empty-handed with having nothing which they required, who would supply his need? He will have to come back empty-handed. That is certain, and therefore what they produce at home must be not only enough for themselves, but such both in quantity and quality as to accommodate those from whom their wants are supplied. Then more husbandmen, more artisans will be required. Not to mention the importers and exporters who are called merchants. Suppose now that a husbandman or an artisan brings some production to market, and he comes at a time when there is no one to exchange with him. Is he to leave his calling and sit idle in the marketplace? Not at all. He will find people there who, seeing the want, undertake the office of salesman. In well-ordered state, they have commonly those who are the weakest in bodily strength, and therefore of little use for any other purpose. Their duty is to be in the market and give money in exchange for goods to those who desire to sell, and to take money from those who desire to buy. This want then creates a class of retail traders in our state. Retailers and merchants and a bunch of servants and other people, because their state has matured. Where then is justice, and where is injustice, and in what part of the state did they spring up? Probably in the dealings of these citizens with one another. I can't imagine that they are more likely to be found anywhere else. I dare say that you are right in your suggestion, I said. We had better think the matter out and not shrink from the inquiries. Let us then consider, first of all, what will be their way of life now that we have thus established them? Will they not produce corn and wine and clothes and shoes and build houses for themselves? And when they are housed, they will work in summer commonly stripped and barefoot, but in the winter substantially clothed and shod. They will feed in the barley meal and flour of wheat, baking and kneading them, making noble cakes and loaves. They will serve up on a mat of reeds or on the clean leaves, themselves reclining, strewn with yew or myrtle, and their children will feast, drinking of the wine which they have made, wearing garlands on their heads, and hymning the praises of the gods, and happily converse with one another, and they will take care that their families do not exceed their means, having an eye to poverty or war. But, said Glaucon interposing, you have not given them a relish to their meal. True, I replied, I have forgotten. Of course they must have relish, salt and olives and cheese, and they will boil roots and herbs such as a country people prepare. For the desert we shall give them figs and peas and beans. They will roast myrtle berries and acorns in the fire, drinking in moderation. With such a deity they may be expected to live in peace and health to good old age, and bequeath a similar life to their children after them. Yes, Socrates, he said, and if we were providing for a city of pigs, how else would you feed the beasts? But what would you have, Glaucon? I replied. Why, he said, you should give them the ordinary conveniences of life. People who are to be comfortable are accustomed to lie on the sofas and dine off tables, and they should have sauces and sweets in the modern style. Yes, I said, now I understand. The question which you would have me consider is not only how a state, but how a luxurious state is created. Possibly there is no harm in this, for in such a state we shall be more likely to see how justice and injustice originated. In my opinion, the true and healthy constitution of a state is the one which I have described. But if you wish also to see a state at fever heat, I have no objection, for I suspect that many will not be satisfied with a simpler way of life. They will be for adding sofas and tables and other furnitures, also dainties and perfumes and incense and courtesans and cakes, all of these not of one sort only, but in every variety. You must go beyond the necessities of which I was at first speaking, which is houses of clothes and shoes, and the arts of the painter and the embroiderer will have to be set in motion, and gold and ivory of all sorts of materials must be produced. True, he said, then we must enlarge our borders, for the original healthy state is no longer sufficient. Now will the city have to fill and swell with multitude of callings which are not required by the natural want, such as the whole tribe of hunters and actors, of whom one large class have to do with forms and colors. Another will be votaries of music, poets, and other attendant trains, rhapsodists, players, dancers, contractors, also makers of divers kinds of articles, including women dresses. And living in this way, we shall have great need for physicians. There needs much more of all this stuff. Quite true. And a slice of our neighbor's land will be wanted by us for pasture and tilling, and they will want a slice of ours if, like ourselves, they exceed the limit of necessity and give themselves up to the unlimited accumulation of wealth. That, Socrates, will be inevitable. And so we shall go to war, Glaucon, shall we not? We certainly, most certainly, he replied, and without determining as yet whether war does good or harm. Thus much we may affirm that now we have discovered war to be derived from causes which are also the causes of almost all the evils in state, private as well as public. Undoubtedly. Our state must once more enlarge, and this time the enlargement will be nothing short of a whole army, which will have to go out and fight with the invaders for all that we have, as well as for the things and persons whom we're describing above. Why, he said, are they not capable of defending themselves? No, I said, not if we were right in the principle which was acknowledged by all of us when we were framing the state. The principle, as you will remember, was that one man cannot practice many arts with success. Very true, he said, but is not war an art? Certainly, and art required such attention as shoemaking. Quite true, and the shoemaker was not allowed by us to be a husbandman or weaver or builder, in order that we might have our shoes well made, but to him and to every other worker was assigned one work for which he was by nature fitted, and that he was to continue working all his life long at no other. He was not to let opportunity slip, and then he would become a good workerman. Now nothing can be more important than that work of a soldier should be well done, but is war and art so easily acquired that a man may be a warrior who is also a husbandman or shoemaker or the artisan? Although no one in the world would be a good dice or draught player who merely took up the game as recreation and had not for his earliest yet years devoted himself to this and nothing else. No tools will make a man a skilled workerman or a master of defense, nor be any use to him who has not learned how to handle them and has never bestowed any attention upon them. How then will he who takes up a shield or other implement of war become a good fighter, all in a day, whether with heavy armored or any other kind of troops? Yes, he said, the tools which would teach men their own use would be beyond price, and the higher the duties of a guardian, I said, the more time and skill and application will be needed by him. No doubt, he replied. Will he not also require natural aptitude for his calling? Certainly. Then it will be our duty to select, if we can, natures which are fitted for the task of guarding the city. It will, and the selection will be no easy matter, I said, but we must be brave and do our best. Is not the noble youth very like a well-bred dog in respect of the guarding and watching? What do you mean? I mean that both of them ought to be quick to see and swift to overtake the enemies when they see him, and strong too if when they have caught him they have to fight with him. All these qualities, he replied, will certainly be required by them, and your guardian must be brave if he is to fight well. Certainly, and is he likely to be brave who has no spirit, whether horse or dog or any other animal? Have you ever observed how invincible and unconquerable is spirit, and how the presence of it makes the soul of any creature to be absolutely fearless and indomitable? I have. Then now we have a clear notion of the bodily qualities which are required in the guardian.
We should just point that out and highlight that for myself.
True, and also the mental ones. His soul is to be full of spirit, yes, but are not these spirited natures apt to be savage with one another and with everybody else? A difficulty by no means easy to overcome, he replied. Whereas I said they ought to be dangerous to their enemies and gentle to their friends. If not, they will destroy themselves without waiting for their enemies to destroy them. True, he said. What is to be done then? I said. How shall we find a gentle nature which has also a great spirit? spirit, for the one is the contradiction of the other. He will not be a good guardian who is wanting in either of these two qualities, and yet the combination of them appear to be impossible, and hence we must infer that to be good guardian is impossible. I am afraid that you say is true, he replied. Here, feeling perplexed, I began to think over what preceded. My friend, I said, no wonder that we are in a perplexity, for we have lost sight of the image which we had before us. What do you mean, he said. I mean to say that where do exist natures gifted with those opposite qualities, and where do you find them? Many animals, I replied. Furnishing examples of them, our friends the dogs is a very good one. I know that well-bred dogs are perfectly gentle to their familiars and acquaintances, and the reverse to strangers. And ain't that the truth, my protectors? Yes, I know. Then we are nothing impossible or out of the orders of nature in our finding a guardian who has similar combination of qualities. Certainly not. Would not he who is fitted to be a guardian besides the spirit of nature need to have the qualities of a philosopher?
The dogs can go overboard with problems with stranger too. Turn on friends. They're grumpy.
I do not apprehend your meaning. The trait of which I am speaking, I replied, may be also seen in the dog and is remarkable in the animal. What trait? Why, a dog, whenever he sees a stranger, is angry. When in acquaintance, he welcomes him. Although the one has never done him any harm, nor the other any good. Did this never strike you as curious?
My dogs do it all the time. They give the business to all newcomers for the most part, unless they got some good energy. Sorry.
Yeah. You good? And surely this instinct of the dog is very charming. Your dog is a true philosopher. Why? Why? Because he distinguishes the faces of friend and of enemy, only by the criterion of knowing and not knowing. And must not an animal be a lover of learning who determines what he likes and dislikes by the test of knowledge and ignorance? Most assuredly, and is not the love of wisdom which is philosophy? They are same, he replied. And may we not say confidently of a man also, that he was likely to be gentle to his friends and acquaintances, must by nature be a lover of wisdom and knowledge? That we may safely affirm. Then who is to be a really good and noble guardian of the state, will require to unite in himself philosophy and spirit, and swiftness and strength. Then we have found the desired natures, how are they to be reared and educated? Is not this an inquiry which may be expected to throw light on the greater inquiry, which is our final end? How do justice and injustice grow up on the state? For we do not want either to admit that is to the point or draw out the argument to an inconvenient length. Adeimantus thought that the inquiry would be of great service to us. Then I said, my dear friend, the task must not be given up by them, even if somewhat long. Certainly, come then, let us pass a leisure hour in storytelling, and our story shall be the education of our heroes. By all means. And what shall be their education? Can we find a better than the traditional sort? And this has two divisions, gymnastics for the body and music for the soul. True. Shall we begin education with music and go on to gymnastics afterwards? By all means. And when you speak of music, do you include literature or not? I do. And literature may be either true or false, yes. The young should be trained in both kinds, and we begin with the false. I do not understand your meaning, he said. You know I said that we begin by telling children stories which, through not wholly destitute of truth, are in the main fictitious, and these stories are told them when they are not of an age to learn gymnastics. That was my meaning when I said we must teach music before gymnastics. Quite right, he said. You know also that the beginning is the most important part of any work, especially in the case of a young and tender thing, for that is the time at which the characters is being formed and the desired impression is more readily taken. Quite true. And shall we just carelessly allow children to hear any casual tales, which may be devised by casual persons, and to receive into their minds ideas of the most part, the very opposite of those which we should wish them to have when they are grown up? We cannot. Then the first thing we will be to establish a censorship of the writers of fiction, and let the censors receive any tale of fiction which is good and reject the bad, and we will desire mothers and nurses to tell their children the authorized ones only. Let them fashion the mind with such tales even more fondly than they mold the body with their hands, but most of those which are now in use must be discarded. Of what tales are you speaking? You may find a model of the lesser and the greater, I said, for they are necessarily of the same type. There is the same spirit in both of them. Very likely, he replied. But I do not as yet know what you would term the greater. Those, I said, which are narrated by Homer and the rest of the poets, who have ever been the great storytellers of mankind. But which stories do you mean, he said, and what faults do you find with them? A fault which is most serious, I said. I said the fault of telling a lie. And what is more important, a bad lie? But when is this fault committed? Whenever an erroneous representation is made by the nature of gods and heroes, as when a painter paints a portrait not having the shadow of likeness to the original. Yes, he said, that sort of thing is certainly very blamable, but what are the stories which you mean? First of all, I said there was that greatest of all lies in high places which the poet told about Uranus, and which was bad lie too. I mean, Hesiod says that Uranus did, and how Cornus related to him, the doing of Cornus, and the suffering which in turn his son inflicted upon him, even if they were true, ought certainly not be lightly told by young and thoughtless persons. If possible, they had better be buried in silence. But if there is an absolute necessity for their mention, the chosen few might hear them in mystery, and they should sacrifice not a common pig, but some huge and unprocurable victim. And then the number of the hearers will be very few indeed. Why, yes, said he, those stories are extremely objectionable. Yes, Adeimantus, they are stories not to be repeated in our state. The young man should not be told that in committing the worst of crimes he is far from doing anything outrageous, and that even if he chastises his father when he does wrong, in whatever matter, he'll only be following the example of the first and greatest among the gods. I entirely agree with you, he said. In my opinion, those stories are quite unfit to be repeated. Neither if we mean our future guardians to be regarded with habit of quarreling among themselves, as of all things the Besets, should any word be said to them of the wars in heaven, and of the plots of fightings of the gods against one another, for they are not true. No, we shall never mention the battles of the giants, or let them be embroidered on garments, and we shall be silent about the innumerable other quarrels of gods and heroes with their friends and relatives. If they would only believe us, we would tell them that the quarreling is unholy, and that never up to this time has there been any quarrel between citizens. This is what old men and old women should begin by telling children, and when they grow up, the poets also should be told to compose them in a similar spirit. but the narrative of Hephaestus finding Tyr, his mother, or how on other occasions Zeus sent him flying for taking her part when she was being beaten, and all the battles of the gods in Homer, these tales must not be admitted into our state, whether they are supposed to have an allegorical meaning or not. For a young person cannot judge what is allegorical and what is literal. Anything that he receives into his mind at that age is likely to become indelible and unalterable, and therefore it is most important that details which the young first hear should be models of virtuous thoughts.
That's an interesting concept. Once you pervert the mind, the soul darkens. You become desensitized to the things that you learn. And so they shouldn't necessarily be hidden from everybody, but exposed to people of different ages. Maybe shouldn't be glorified in impressionable minds, which the mind seems to be impressionable till the mid-20s. Mind's always impressionable, but people seem to stabilize, shifting much in their thought process after their mid-20s. There's a few open-minded folk here and there, but anyway.
There you are right, he replied, but if anyone asks, where are such models to be found, and what tales are you speaking, how shall we answer him? I said to him, you and I, Adeimantus, at this moment are not poets, but founders of a state. Now the founders of a state ought to know the general forms in which poets should cast their tales, and the limits which must be observed by them, but to make the tales is not their business. Very true, he said, but what are these forms of theology which you mean? Something of this kind, I replied. God is always to be represented as he truly is, whatever to be the sort of poetry, epic, lyric, or tragic, in which representation is given. Right, and is he not truly good? And must he not be represented as such? Certainly, and no good thing is hurtful, no indeed. And that which is not hurtful hurts not. Certainly not. And that which hurts not does no evil, no. And can that which does no evil be a cause of evil? Impossible. And the good is advantageous, yes. And therefore the cause of well-being, yes. And there it follows, therefore, that the good is not the cause of all things, but of the good only. Assuredly. Then God, if he be good, is not the author of all things, as the many assert, but if he is the cause of few things only, and not of most things that occur to men. For few are the goods of human life, and many are the evils, and the goods is to be attributed to God alone. Of the evils, the causes are to be sought elsewhere, and not in him.
This is a concept that I really just struggle with, because you want to say God is everything, then you have to admit that God is also playing the role of the devil, which I like that God is everything, rather than separating God out and saying that the devil exists or that other gods exist. But even in the Jew Bible, God talks about other gods. And then Jesus refers to the devil as the god of earth. Separating him out is an interesting concept. But I do like the idea that just think that God's the devil and giving us opportunities to test our soul.
This guy agrees, though, that it must be true. Then we must not listen to Homer or to any other poet who is guilty of the folly of saying that two cast lie at the threshold of Zeus, full of lots, one of good and the other of evil lots, and that he to whom Zeus gives a mixture of the two sometimes meets the evil fortune and other times with good, but that he to whom is given the cup of unmingled ill, him wild hunger drives over the bestious earth, and again Zeus who is the dispenser of good and evil to us. And if anyone asserts that the violation of oaths and treaties, which was really the work of Pandarus, was brought about by Athene and Zeus, or that the strife and contention of the gods were instigated by them and Zeus, he shall not have our approval, neither will we allow our young men to hear the words of Aeschylus, that God plants guilt among men when he desires utterly to destroy a house. And if the poet writes the suffering of Niobe, the subject of the tragedy in which these iambic verses occur, or of the house of Pelops, of the Trojan War, or any other similar theme, either we must not permit him to say that these are the works of God, or if they are of God, we must devise some explanation of them such as we are seeking. We must say that God did what was just and right, and they were the better for being punished, but that those who were punished are miserable, and that God is the author of their misery. The poet is not to be permitted to say, though he may say that the wicked are miserable because they require to be punished, and are benefited by receiving punishments from God, but that God being good is the author of evil to anyone is to be strenuously denied, and not to be said or sung or heard in verse or prose by anyone of whether old or young in any well-ordered commonwealth. Such a fiction is suicidal, ruinous, and impious. I agree with you, he replied, and am ready to give assent to the law. Let this then be one of our rules and principles concerning the gods to which our poet and reciters will expect it to conform, that God is not the author of all things, but of good only. That will do, he said. And what do you think of a second principle? Shall I ask you whether God is a magician and of nature to appear insidiously, now in one shape and now in another, sometimes himself changing and passing into any form, sometimes deceiving us with semblance of such transformations? Or is he one and the same, immutably fixed in his own proper image? I cannot answer you, he said, without more thought. Well, I said, if we suppose a change in anything, that change must be effected either by the thing itself or by some other thing. Most certainly. And the things which are at their best are also least liable to be altered or discomposed. For example, when healthiest and strongest of human frame is least liable to be affected by the meats and drinks, and the plants which is in the fullest vigor also suffers least from the winds, or the heat, or the sun, or any similar cause. Of course, and will not the bravest and wisest and be least confused or deranged by any external influences? True. And the same principle should suppose applies to all composite things, furniture, houses, garments. When good and well made, they are at least altered by time and circumstances. Very true. Then everything which is good, whether made by art or nature or both, is at least liable to suffer change from without. True. But surely God and the things God are in every way perfect. Of course they are. And he can hardly be compelled by external influence to take many shapes. He cannot. But may he not change and transform himself? Clearly, he said that must be the case if he has changed at all. And will he then change himself for the better and fairer, or for the worse and more unsightly? If he changed at all, he can only change for the worse, for we cannot suppose him to be decent either in virtue or beauty. Very true, Adeimantus. But then would anyone, whether God or man, desire to make himself worse? Impossible. Then it is impossible that God should ever be willing to change. Being, as is supposed, the fairest and the best is conceivable, every God remains absolutely and forever in his own form. That necessarily follows, he said, in my judgment. Then I said, my dear friend, let none of the poets tell us that. The gods, taking the disguise of a stranger from other lands, walk up and down cities in all sorts of forms. And let no one slander Proudus and Theotis, neither let anyone, either in tragedy or in other any kind of poetry, introduce here disguised in the likeness of the priestess asking an Elmus for the life-giving daughters of Inachus of the river of Argus. Let us have no more lies of that sort. Neither must we have mothers under the influence of the poets scaring their children with bad versions of these myths, telling how certain gods, as they say, go about by the night in the likeness of so many strangers and in divers forms. But let them make heeds lest they make cowards of their children, and at the same time speak blasphemy against the gods. And that's fair. Bitches fucking do that shit all the time. Heaven forbid, he said. But although the gods are themselves unchangeable, still by witchcraft and deception they may make us think that they appear in the various forms. Perhaps, he replied. Well, but can you imagine that God will be willing to lie, whether in word or deed, or to put forth a phantom of himself? I cannot, he replied. Do you know I said that the true lie of such an expression may be allowed is hated of gods and men? What do you mean, he said. I mean that no one is willingly deceived in that which is the truest and highest part of himself, or the truest and highest matters there above all. He is most afraid of a lie having possession of him. Still, he said, I do not comprehend you. The reason is, I replied, that you attribute some profound meaning to my words, but I am only saying that deception or being deceived or uninformed about the highest realities and the highest parts of themselves, which is the soul, and in that part of them to have and to hold the lie, is what mankind, at least like that, I say, is what they utterly detest. There is nothing more hateful to them. And as I was just remarking, this ignorance and soul of him who is deceived may be called the true lie, for the lie in words is only a kind of imitation and shadowy image of the previous affection of the soul, not pure unadulterated falsehood. Am I not right? Perfectly right. The true lie is hated not only by the gods but also by men, yes, whereas the lie in words is in certain cases useful and not hateful in dealing with enemies. That would be an instance, or again, when those whom we call our friends in fit of madness or illusion are going to do some harm, then it is useful and is sort of a medicine or a preventative, also in the tales of mythology, of which we are just now speaking, because we do not know the truth about ancient times. We make falsehood as much like truth as we can. But can any of these reasons apply to God? Can we suppose that he is ignorant of antiquity, and therefore he is recourse to invention? That would be ridiculous, he said. Then the lying poet has no place in our idea of God. I should say not. Or perhaps he may tell a lie because he is afraid of enemies. This is inconceivable. But he may have friends who are senseless or mad. But no mad or senseless person can be a friend of God. And no motive can be imagined why God should lie. And the superhuman and divine is absolutely incapable of falsehood. Yes, and God's perfectly simple and true, both in word and deed. He changes not, he deceives not, either by sign or word, by dream or by waking. Your thoughts, he said, are a reflection of my own. You agree with me then, I said, that this is the second type or form in which we should write and speak about divine things. The gods are not magicians who transform themselves, neither do they deceive mankind in any way. I grant that. Then although we are admirers of Homer, we do not admire the lying dream which Zeus sends Agamemnon, neither will we praise the verses of Aeschylus and the Theotis, says that Apollo at her nuptials was celebrating in song her fair progeny, whose days were to be long and to no sickness. And when he had spoken of many lot, as in all things blessed of heaven, he raised a note of triumph and cheered my soul. And I thought that the words of Phoebus, being divine and full of prophecy, would not fail. Now he himself who uttered the strain, he who was present at the banquet, and who has said this, he it is who slain my son. There are the kind of sentiments by the gods which will arouse our anger, and he who utters them shall be refused. Of course, neither shall we allow teachers to make use of them in instruction of the young, meaning as we do, that our guardians, as far as men can be, should be true worshippers of gods and like them. I certainly agree in these principles and promise to make them my laws. Hey, so I don't want to be up here any longer. Let's head back to the car. Let's eat some of that chicken. What do you think? Ready for the hike down? You can wait for us though, yeah? You ain't in a hurry, are you? Are you my bestest boy? Oh, shit.